Good morning. I thought that today we go ahead and break out of the little mold and just go ahead and show you what's going on in the grow space. As you can see, temperatures are high, humidity is pretty good going into the springtime for grow season. So just getting into some of my collection here, I know in a couple of videos I have talked about primarily growing Phalaenopsis and Paph Petalums, but I do have some other orchids in the collection. So we'll give a quick run through of what I have going on. I'll try to stick to what's actually growing, though there's a lot, because I don't want to make this too long. So to head over here, we have my catasetum, which is actually going into dormancy. I believe this is a Ringoliglia now. I'm really not sure. It was a BLC when I bought it. Now it's an RLC, but it's a Volcano Queen. Back here, we have a Walkeriana crossed with the Brassivola. That one is actually not doing much. I did purchase it in bloom, but as of now, and I purchased it about 8 months ago, 9 months ago. As of now, it's not doing much. Another orchid that I bought was a BLC when I purchased it 2 years ago, but now reclassified as RLC Ringoliglia Cattleya, which I believe is, basically just a Cattleya. And this one really hasn't stopped growing. I believe it was just out of flask when I purchased it, and it just had those two growths on it, and it grew two more in my care. The second one that I'm mentioning in that two is currently growing right now. I also have a Paph cross here, Bolotulum biennivium, Paph Psych. Got that 2 years ago as well. There's another division on another shelf down there. When I repotted it, it actually came apart. Here, Neostylus Pinky also had two keikis on a shelf down below that came off when I repotted it. This one put out a spike for me, but didn't bloom because I didn't keep up the watering. And as you all can see, as a rule of thumb, I do grow in all organic media, primarily in cups. There are some pots here, but primarily in cups that I transition them to stay in a bit longer. I do reuse the cups after a thorough cleaning, or some of them I just don't. They're so cheap. So two paths here. Chuyo Ricky with Chu Yi Rookie, which is a cross between Rothschildianum and Tyanum. So it should be a tiny multifloral. That's pretty exciting there. Some of these pots are wet because for the paths today was watering day. Emersonii here putting on a good new growth leaf that hasn't bloomed for me yet. I've had this for almost 2 years. This is, I think, Brassivola Yaki Cuculata crossed with something else that I can't remember. Let's see here. So it's a Nodosa crossed with a Cuculata called a Yaki. Here we have a Richard Mueller crossed with the Yellowbird. Pretty vigorous grower. It hasn't bloomed for me yet, but it's been continuously growing. It's put out about 2 growths in my care. Tips that you see there are actually fertilizer burns, so I've stopped fertilizing it because I have slow release fertilizer in my pot, so that's just now getting slow release fertilizer. Psychopsis Mendenhall put out this one struggled for me because I couldn't figure out what it liked to grow in, but I've got it. It just likes to stay wet. And I know some orchids are more prone to appreciating a wet dry cycle, but this one just enjoys staying wet for me. Like, I don't know, the roots really don't grow on the outside, but the bulbs, since I've switched it over to this primarily moss setup, it's just been doing great. And right now it's actually putting out a very small growth in there, but it's hard to see and focus on it. Don't know if it's a growth or a spike, but I'm assuming a growth. And I got a frag over here. Peruflora's Fantasy or Delight or something. I don't know what's the cross of, but it wasn't doing well when I got it. And this new growth, though, that it put out is doing okay. Moving on to my novelty shelves I have up here. These are all on heat mats, so I have them blooming all year round if the temperatures are decent, because I don't temperature control the heat mats, and they're only on for the duration of the lights, which are on primarily 12 to 14 hours during the grow season, depending. So I'm not going to go through each one here because basically all of my phals up here, the novelties and species, which are grown a bit on the warmer side, are all growing and blooming. Some of the blooms we have are Sogo Rose here. Love this plant. Vigorous bloomer. Since I bought it last year, it's been blooming on the same spike. But it gives me about 4 flowers at a time. Lately it's slowed down, and I think it's because of a repot. I did repot it because the old moss that it was in just wasn't absorbing water the way I thought it should. Moving along, we do have Tetrabell in bud back there. 2 big plants. There's a Tetrabell, which is a Tetraspis crossed with a Felina. In front of it, that huge leaf is a Violacea crossed with a Pulchra. That one is like a Finchi Kunriawati. It's a strange name there. Not a strange name, but particularly long. This one is Yaphon. I'm actually not sure. It's either Sweetheart or Pink Bee. I don't know what the name is or cultivar. I lost the tag. So that one's either Yaphon Pink Bee or Yaphon Sweetheart. Beautiful pink and yellow blooms with a nice soft fragrance. Down here we have another novelty. That's a Hawaii Dragon Girl. She's crossed with the Violacea. So there's a lot of Violacea going on in this cross. It's a pretty vigorous grower. The spike that it came with is still on and is putting out a bloom now. And this one is a new spike that's put out in my care. Moving on, we do have the Tangxing Fly Eagle, which is a pretty popular cross of Dragon Tree Eagle by Tetraspis, I believe. And this one basically puts out sort of different pattern of petals every time. Mine are fairly equal because this cross I noticed puts out fairly red blooms. This is the TS66 cross. Most of the blooms are fairly red. I'm not sure if it's gonna put out yellow. I do know it's a vigorous grower. We've got a leaf here and another spike actually growing back here, so that's gonna be fun. Back here we got a couple of more warmer growers. There's a Paph grown in here, Leucochilum, which is a highlight warm grower. I believe it might be putting out a sheath. It looks like it's growing 2 leaves at a time, and normally that indicates that the second leaf is a sheath or a bud, but we'll see. Jermaine Vincent. This one is also struggling for some reason in my care. It did put out this second spike, and the first spike has done nothing since I got it. So we'll see where that goes. Zheng Ming Jazz. First spike back there, and then we have a second spike growing on it. This one has also been struggling a bit in my care. I'm not sure. Some of them seem to just be a hit or miss. We have a Corner Survey. This one struggled in my care because the moss it came in, I don't know, I think it was just too light. I kept up with the watering and the plant was just very wobbly in the pot, and it was just weird. I might have even over fertilized it based on the old leaves, but the second leaf that's coming in is pretty good, and it looks like it's adjusting to my light, maybe, with all the red anthocyanin appearing there. Moving over to this shelf, we got a couple of more phals here, of course, warm growers, and that random Paph. There's a couple of Paphs that I'm just moving around to see if they work in different warmer, cooler, intermediate environments. And back here, this is actually a Philippinense cross with the Tyanum, which are primarily warm growers, which is why it's up here on the heat mat in the highlight with the novelty and species phals. Moving over here, Tabasco, Texas, coming out of bloom. And this, I kind of wanted to make this video today because in the world of orchid growing, people will always show you everything that's going great. And unfortunately, with my Violacea this morning, I came home and a leaf fell out. It looks like there's some stem rot going on here. This first spike that seems to be yellowing was the first spike it came with, and then it grew this spike in my care and bloomed. And I'm not sure if this bloom is gonna make it because the edge of this bud just looks really questionable, and my camera just won't focus here, but the edge of this bud is just dried out. I'm just not sure. It has the color and everything, but I'm not sure if that's gonna make it. We have Phal. Bronze Maiden is a synonym name for it, but I believe the registered name is Shilman. Obviously falling out of bloom, but one of the reasons why this one is called Bronze Maiden is because the manii that's crossed with the Shirley in the parentage is a manii black, which would give the plant darker flowers, and as you can see, a bit of darker appearance on the leaves. This one's a silver cross, so although the background of the leaves is dark, the silver is really why I bought it. It's just beautiful. Pretty cool. It's a vigorous grower, falling out of bloom right now. I think this has been in bloom for almost 4 months. Let's see here. We have a couple of other orchids, everything growing. In bud, we have the Mituo Zheng Dragon. I believe it's number 11 from Big Leaf Orchids. Such a pretty bloom and a pretty large plant. I'm sure the repot this year, this is gonna go up a size. That's in the 4-inch pot right now. Princess Kayulani. This was on my wish list. It's a pretty small plant, but it's been blooming since I bought it. It has put out the spike in my care. Bloomed a few months ago and is now putting out another bud, as you can see. And basically, if anything's not putting out a leaf right now, it's pretty vigorously putting out roots. So moving down, I do have a second shelf here that I primarily put a lot of orchids that are in bloom, because this shelf has the humidifier and fan all together with a nice soft light that I kind of just love and makes my blooms last long. So getting into this Paph here, I believe this is QF Winona, which is, let's see what this is a cross of. This is a cross of Leucochyllum and Nivium, so again, warm growers. I do grow in an intermediate warm climate, so I enjoy having blooms all year round. I can even have plants bloom in my winter on the top shelves with or without the heat mats, because that microclimate just tends to be a bit more warm than other areas. And next we have primulinum, my sequential bloomer. So this baby actually puts out a bloom just every couple of weeks. It just keeps going. Every couple of months, I should say. No, every couple of weeks. The flower stays in bloom for about a month maybe, and then just pops off, and another one just blooms. It's a very nice plant. I definitely recommend it. I really love the strappy leaves of this plant. It's all green. Moving on, this is probably my favorite Phal. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with the hobby, and this is Sweet Memory, a Violacea species crossed with Deverentiana, which is actually a cross of Amabilis and Amboinensis. This plant not only is a vigorous grower with regard to the foliage. I mean, I bought it in spike and I put out another spike in my care. It's blooming proliferously, profoundly, however you want to describe it. The roots are everywhere. I mean, I really just love the plant, and the smell is indescribable. It's like a spicy Fruit Loop. I don't know how to describe it. It's like a fruity cinnamon smell. It's really gorgeous, and with the fans going, it's out of this world sometimes in the living room. One of the standard minis I got from, I think, Hauserman, this one just keeps going, and every time it blooms, it just puts out a small little bouquet. I love it. It's coming out, as you can see, some of the top blooms are starting to fade, but even in the fading process, the blooms are just, I love them. They're very long lasting. They don't have a waxy texture like a lot of plants, but they do have that diamond dust texture, so I think that's why they last pretty long. Next we have Paph Shirley Amundson, I believe is her name, and I fell in love with her because of the foliage. As with many of my Paph, she's a very vigorous grower, and right now she has 2 spikes. She did bloom for me. I'm not sure if you can see that old one. She did bloom for me last year, and these two new growths did put out spikes simultaneously, and one did open. One is about to start. I think I'm gonna have to move this down because it looks like it's gonna hit the top of the shelf. But this one that's in bloom here actually has a smaller bud in the back here, and it's been pretty dormant, so I'm not sure if it's ever gonna come to fruition, but it would be pretty nice just to, you know, keep the trophy as a super vigorous grower. Next, on the contrary, we have Argus. I wouldn't necessarily call it a vigorous grower, but it grows very steady and has a very strong spike. I haven't had to spike it at all, unlike Shirley Amundson, where I had to spike it somewhere along the way. This one is just, it's magnificent to me. The modeling on the foliage is very unique to it, as comparison to the flower next to it. And it's these Paph petalums I love. They bloom all year. Some of them bloom when it's cool, some of them bloom when it's warm. Speaking of warm, we have the other piece of my Paph Psych, which is the Nivium by Bellatulum, and that's coming into bud there. I'm not sure if you can see or if my camera's gonna focus anymore, but we actually have a sheath coming out, so that's exciting. Moving on to the next shelf. One of my pride and joys of the Phalaenopsis is my Schilleriana species. It's such a vigorous grower, and it's huge. I had to actually repot it right away because it kept tipping over in that small, tiny sleeve that it came in. And it did come with the spike, unfortunately, that I did kill because the spike was planted a little deep in that moss and I didn't know it was there, so I kept watering it. And the bounce back has been insane. This second spike that it's put on, not only has it been branching, and recently as well, but it's put on a keiki because recently, just as it was about to bloom, the temperature switched over to warm, and it just decided that because I had warm days and warm nights, it wasn't blooming season. So now we have this keiki forming, and I'm excited. I'll have a second Schilleriana soon. And just moving along, we have Schilleriana's brother, Stewartiana, not doing so well. So this one came to me on the mount, and it's just struggled. Like, on the mount, it struggled. I took it off and put it in the pot. It's struggling to root, but it does have a couple of roots that I've put some moss on that are doing fairly well, but the plant is just struggling, and I'm not sure. I don't keep the pot too moist, and I may just go into drenching it and moving on from there, but we'll see. Mini Mark back there, a crowd pleaser, world favorite, if you will. Let's see if I can get I'm not sure if I can get that bloom in there. It's fading now, so I don't want to bend the spike too much or pick up the plant really, because the spike is pretty active right now, budding and extending. Moving along, one of my favorite Paph petalums is Ho Chi Minh. This one just keeps blooming. The leaves are beautiful, insanely beautiful. It's a pretty vigorous plant. Right now, I believe this is a 5-inch pot that it's in, maybe a 4.5. But it's a gorgeous plant, and just watching it come into bloom is I mean, it's an addiction in itself, let alone when that puffy bud actually opens. The first time it bloomed, it didn't have a scent, but I'm hoping that this time around, possibly it'll have that raspberry scent. Delenatii, which is in its parentage, doesn't always have the scent. It's actually the Malapoense that does, and I'll get to that one in a sec. Moving on to this shelf, and back here we have a couple of Phals. I don't really have anything going on too much, but growth and lots of foliage and leaves. Sogo Vivian is what I want to talk about though. This plant, not only is it beautiful when it's not in bloom, as you can see with this gorgeous variegation, but it just keeps blooming. I just cut off the 2 spikes, and I'm certain that no more than 2 weeks later, I saw this little spike coming out, and I'm impressed. I mean, it's putting out roots in the pot. These don't get watered till tomorrow, so we probably won't see much, but it's stabilizing roots in the pot, and it's putting out that new leaf. it's a great plant. I definitely recommend it for people who love to look at something all the time, because it's going to give you those beautiful pink and white blooms, and then the green and yellow foliage. It's a win-win, just a win-win. Just below, on my bottom shelf, we're getting into where the temperatures stay a bit cooler, and I like to keep my paths down here. And there are a couple of other plants and phals. Some of them are because I don't have enough space, and others because I'm just trying some things out. So I have a couple of the bigger paths down here because this corner is so strange. It gets very, very hot during the day and then has a significant drop at night. And I know a lot of the green leaf Paphiopedilums enjoy that drop. What I found is that temperature drops are actually relative. So if a plant needs a drop, you know, the higher you can get that temperature safely during the day, and the more you can get it to drop at night, the better. So my temps can get up to 80 at night, and then I can have like 80 during the day, and then like 68 at night. The plants really enjoy it, and I can see a difference sometimes the morning after, especially on watering day, which was today. So jumping into these paths, I have a complex path and some of my favorites, which is why I'm spending some time. So we have a Philippinense, which was one of my all-time favorites that I wanted to get. And I honestly think that it may be putting on a sheath, but I'm not too sure. If it's not putting on the sheath, there's some stress going on because this leaf here is smaller than the last one. So we'll see. But I do have a lot of Roth crosses. So we have a Dulgoldi, which is Roth for cross with Arminiacum, I can never say it, but it's a beautiful tall yellow flower. And Del Rosie, Rothschildianum cross with Delenatii, and then Gloria Noggle, Rothschildianum cross with Micranthum. They're all doing very well and growing because it's getting warm. So moving along, because I just really want to stick with the blooms and buds, but again, all my paths are growing, and as you can see, I have so many mottleds. I just love the mottled leaves. Magic Lantern's one of my favorites here. Barbatum as well. It clumps up. Only bloomed for me once. And Malapoense. See, Malapoense is one of the paths that's supposed to guarantee you a scent. Some people says it smells on the raspberry side. I hear a lot of people say it smells like almond. So I'm very excited to see that. It's gonna be a tall spike, so I know I'm gonna have to move it, but we'll address that when the time comes. A lot of growth back here with my paths. And again, I keep these on the lower shelf because the temperature down here tends to be, if it's 75 up here, it's most likely like 73, 72 on the bottom. And it's not much of a difference for us, but it's a difference for the plants. And moving along, just to go ahead and start wrapping this video up, some more growths on my paths. My Micranthum, I've been unsuccessful with trying to bloom this baby. I've got it to bud, but it won't bloom. So this is gonna go into a smaller pot, number one, because these runners, it puts out these runners and then grows on the runners, are doing weird things. And I think I'm keeping the plant too moist, according to Mr. Norman, one of the famous growers whose advice has gotten me pretty far. But yeah, lastly, one of the plants from him actually is Unimax. That's in bloom, and that's going to be moving pretty soon. As you can see, I've been playing with this spike because I don't have a stake that can fit under here, under here until I'm able to move it and put a bigger stake on it. So I may just put that somewhere else. And as you can see up here, I have my Aka Baby, this is called. It's an Oncidium that has bloomed for me, and as you can see, the new growth and the older growth are both putting out new growth, so that's pretty exciting. I have a plant that's struggling here. This is my KS Super Zebra. I don't think it's gonna make it. I don't know what happened. It's been in the same care as everything else, but it just didn't take off. And there's one root in the pot. I'm not gonna touch it to move it. And of course, another standard Phal up there. And that was, you know, another introduction to my grow space that was a little more in-depth and detailed, a bit more of an intimate look at my babies, my kids. And I'll go ahead and put my social media handles up here too. I do post a flurry of photos on my Instagram as well as sharing them to my Facebook for those of us who just like to enjoy the photos without all of the motion picture. And with that, I will leave you all. Have a wonderful day and we'll see you next video.